Good afternoon, arts education advocates. Good morning to education advocates on the West Coast. My name is Tooshar Swain. I am Director of Public Policy at Americans for the Arts. We're so honored that you're joining us today for this Arts and Education Week preparation webinar. In 2010, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution which designated the week starting with the second Sunday in September as National Arts and Education Week. The purpose of the resolution is to celebrate the transformative power of arts education in all students. The resolution also encourages governors, mayors, and other elected officials, such as state legislatures and school boards, to sign similar proclamations. So today we hope to equip you with those tools to advocate for those resolutions to state and local lawmakers. We will hear from experts on their arts education experiences, and we will provide you with some of the newest and most relevant data and research on arts and arts education. Next slide. Americans for the Arts and Arts Action Fund host year-round advocacy training. This is our third in our series this year, thus Advocacy 301. Arts Vote 2024 will Make Your Vote Count webinar on September 5th, 2024 will be our Advocacy 401. This webinar will focus on how to best use your state voter fact sheets, and you'll hear from state arts leaders about how they are galvanizing get out the vote efforts in their states. And we'll have a bonus post-election impact webinar on 2024, as we'll analyze how the election results impact the arts and arts policies. And I think you'll want to tune into that. Next slide. Today's webinar resources, including these slides on your screen, will be hosted on our webinar resources panel with the link provided in the chat and on the slide. You'll be receiving new updates on various new assets that we have to advocate for Arts and Education Week. And if you have any questions and at any time, you can email us at advocacy@artsusa.org, and we'll get back to you with an answer as soon as we possibly can. Next slide. You can ask questions today in the Q&A box, where you can also upvote a question to better ensure that that question is asked. And we might not get to every single question today. If that's the case, an Americans for the Arts staff member will follow up with you in the coming days to answer those questions. So thank you in advance for your patience. Next slide. And here are our wonderful participants in today's webinar. Dr. Susan Magsamen will provide our keynote presentation, followed by a panel featuring 3 expert state and local advocates: Jeff Robinson of South Carolina Arts Alliance, Lauren Meehan of Arts Ed Newark, and Waduda Muhammad of Georgians for the Arts. And our resident expert on arts education advocacy, Olivia Tarpley, will take us home with some advocacy tips and tools at your disposal for Arts and Education Week. Before we turn it over to that star-studded lineup, I'd like to bring in our interim co-CEO, Jamie Bennett, to kick us off with a few words. Hi, Jamie.
Hey, Tooshar, thanks so much. And I am really just here on behalf of myself and Susie DeValle, who's AFDA's other co-CEO, to thank you all so much for taking the time this afternoon to think about arts education and to think about some of the ways that we can be active citizens and help make sure the federal government is responding to what those of us on the ground actually want. Waduda, Jeff, Lauren, and Susan are 4 absolutely extraordinary colleagues who have a lot to share with all of you, and am just really excited to get into what they're doing. My own history with arts education professionally goes back. I was lucky enough to work with a woman called Agnes Gund, who started working on issues of arts education in New York City in the 1970s, when New York City was on the verge of bankruptcy. And as many of you know, the decision that the city made at that time was to eliminate arts as a category from New York City's public schools. And it feels like we've still been fighting that battle for 50 years. And it's possible to sort of lose sight of the advances that have been made and that things are actually different. So really excited to be sort of focused on what Tooshar teed up for us, the legislative action that we want to be advocating on behalf of and how we want to move things forward. I'll say that my actual connection to arts education goes back to when I was a singing orphan in a production of Oliver at the age of 7. So just really excited to be here. Don't want to take any more time in between you and getting to hear from Waduda and Jeff and Lauren and Susan. So with that, again, just thank you all for making the time this afternoon. And I promise you the next hour is going to be really special. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for your dedicated and continued commitment to arts education. We appreciate having you. I'm truly thankful to have gotten to know our keynote presenter over the past year. Dr. Susan Magsamen is the founder and executive director of the International Arts and Mind Lab, a pioneering initiative from the Peterson Brain Science Institute at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Her body of work lies at the intersection of brain sciences and the arts, and how our unique response to aesthetic experiences can amplify human potential. Dr. Magsamen is an award-winning author, having published 8 books, and her newest book, Your Brain on Art: How the Arts Transform Us, is a New York Times bestseller, written alongside with Ivy Ross, Vice President of Google Hardware. Susan, we are thrilled to have you, and the floor is yours.
Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. When Tooshar asked me to do this talk, I was really honored. Learning and the arts have really been a through line for me throughout my life. And so I'm just very excited. In many ways, this conversation is like coming home for me. So I have too many slides and not enough time. So let's get started. Next slide. So as Tooshar mentioned, in 2007, I was asked to develop a program at Johns Hopkins to look at the impact of the arts for health, well-being, and learning. We had a donor who believed that the arts could save us, and I really believed that from my own experience. And so we went to work really starting to think deeply about how many different types of fields study the arts and how we could bring that together. So our lab now is called the Center for Applied Neuroaesthetics, and we work in 4 areas: research, field building, leadership, education, and training. Next slide. And around 2017, I started to hear from people all over the world saying that they were using the arts in some form for well-being and learning and health, and was asked to start to think more deeply about this at the university level. So I connected with the Aspen Institute, where for 2 years, we put our heads to the ground and really listened carefully to what people were saying all over the world, and started to hear these themes about the need for coming together to bring all of the different art forms in ways that we use the arts to help humanity. And so our North Star is to ensure that they use the arts in many forms as part of mainstream education, medicine, and public health. And the NeuroArts Blueprint was really birthed around 2022. And just to give a little bit more information on that, next slide. The Blueprint is really a global network of individuals and coalitions that are looking to create very strong action plans that improve health, well-being, and learning, and also unite diverse fields. We're so siloed that it's very difficult sometimes to know what's happening in this field, because there's so many things happening with different sectors, systems, and also to really be able to build this idea of a new field. Next slide. So at the end of 2022, we released the NeuroArts Blueprint, which is in essence is a 5-year plan that includes 5 core recommendations. The first is to strengthen the research foundation of neuroarts in all of the different ways that we study the arts. The second is to honor and support the many arts practices that promote health and well-being and learning. The third is to expand and enrich educational and career pathways. The fourth is to develop advocacy for sustainable funding and to promote effective policy. And last, to build capacity, leadership, and communication strategies. Next slide. So we've done a lot in the last several years. We are now full speed ahead in the implementation strategy, and that is including the launch of a global resource center that will launch early next year. And I call it a virtual watering hole where anyone interested in the arts, from researchers, practitioners, funders, policymakers, advocates, educators, can come to one place and find something that they're looking for. We've also created something called the Community Neuro Arts Coalitions, and these are hyper-local coalitions that will be able to come together in a learning community on the resource center. We now have 3 pilots, and in October we'll be launching a much larger initiative where we're expecting between 300 and 500 communities to join this effort. And we also announced this year the first ever Neuro Arts Investigator Award with Renee Fleming. And we funded 7 interdisciplinary teams who are working at different types of intersections with different art forms for different kinds of issues. Next slide. We've also commissioned 2 economic impact studies, one on Alzheimer's and music in terms of quality of life, and a second on what's called the true value. And that will be coming out with AARP in the next several months. And we've created a stellar scientific advisory board that's really looking at the research agenda for studying the arts and learning in health and in well-being. And then through the generous gift of the Music Man Foundation, we are launching something called the Academic Education Network, which is a global network that's looking at research, training programs, and also practices that are being used within the academic community, whether that's four-year universities, community colleges, informal learning. So we start to really be able to build the evidence, the practice, and also hopefully the policies around making this really a sustainable field. Next slide. But there's lots more to do, and these are just some of the things that we'll be working on, including a global summit, strengthening the policy and funding, looking at developing a multifaceted communication strategy, and many other things. Next slide. But this is not happening alone. There are many organizations in the US and around the world that we're working with, including Americans for the Arts, AARP, the World Health Organization, National Endowment for the Arts, NIH, Health and Human Services, the Kennedy Center, many performing arts and cultural arts organizations, both large and small, all over the country and all over the world. And I think what's important to say here is that this idea of neuro arts, of the arts in service of humanity, is not a nice to have. It's not an unrealistic idea or a pipe dream. It really is a rigorous, research-driven translational field. And I think we already know that there are billions of people around the world already using the arts to enhance their health, their well-being, coalescing with an eye on sustainability. Next slide. So Tooshar mentioned Your Brain on Art. And this was written with my co-author, Ivy Ross. It took us over 4 years to write this book. We actually interviewed over 100 ordinary lived experiences. And in just 6 days, the book became a New York Times bestseller. And our publisher told us that it's extremely rare for a book about the arts to have that kind of a trajectory. But what we've heard from thousands of people now is that the book validated what people already knew about the art and arts experiences, and that it also gave people words to describe the intuitive feelings that they had, and in many ways gave them permission to be able to do art either again or for the first time. And so I think this field and the book has really shown me that we are hungry for better solutions to support our lives, the lives of our children and our communities, and that this work is building meaning and purpose, and I think hope. And so it's a very exciting time. Next slide. So the book makes a bold claim that we're standing on the verge of a cultural shift in which the arts and play can deliver potent, accessible, proven health and well-being solutions to billions of people. Next slide. And I want to just talk a little bit about what I mean when I talk about art. And really the definition is quite broad, but I think important. And that is that when I think about the arts and aesthetic experiences, I think about creative expression. And in that way, it's really unlimited. We could be talking about theater, dance, singing, visual arts, but also gardening, cooking, architecture, and so much more. And I think we know that this work is really beginning to solidify, and all of these art forms are moving us to a very clear understanding that we're really wired for creative expression and that they are the conduit for critical child development. Next slide. So this really made me think more deeply about the role the arts once played in our lives. And in writing the book, we had an opportunity to talk to Indigenous cultures all over the world. And in fact, there's still 5,000 active tribes, and many of them do not have a word for art because it's how they live in their daily lives. This is an image of a Colombian cave painting that just represents ancient experiences of daily life. Next slide. This image that you're about to see is a picture that was done a couple months ago in a summer camp where a 10-year-old boy was actually drawing what was on his mind. And if you look closely, you can see there are fire-breathing dragons, and a lot of stuff is going on. And the reality is that not much has changed. We're still documenting through our visual arts and the way that we create art what's happening in our world today. Next slide. And this is a story cloth that illustrates life's joys, struggles, and triumphs through a program called the Common Threads Project, which also, shows so many different aspects of our life, including, if you see in the bottom left-hand corner, a home where we seek shelter and comfort, whether there's something that's happening in the world that is unsafe, or we're just looking for rest. So, these experiences continue to be illustrated in such beautiful ways. Next slide. So another example is this piece of art that was found by geologist David Zhang in Tibet, and it's believed to be 226,000 years old. And if you look at it closely, what you can see are representations of our hands. And I find it fascinating that these are still the same tools that we create our world today. We're both makers and beholders since the beginning of the time. And when we were working on the book, I had an opportunity to meet with the Harvard evolutionary biologist E.O. Wilson. And he made a great point that these experiences are really gateways to transformation and transcendence, and that they're essential to the human species, and that we would not have evolved had we not really needed to create these expressions and share ourselves in the ways that we do. But the only way that we can share our voice and experience the world is by bringing the world in through our senses. Next slide. And I won't go into a lot of details in the interest of time, but I've become really fascinated by our sensory mechanisms and the extraordinary ways that our bodies work to bring the world into our inner lives. Visually, you process about 34,000 pieces of information in a single hour. You'll process 30 million pieces of information, visual information, over your lifetime. Your fingertips have 3,000, each of your fingertips have 3,000 touch receptors that allow you to instantly release neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin. And even your nose, you can detect over 1 trillion odors with over 400 different types of scent receptors. And those scent receptors turn over every 30 to 60 days. So bodies are these incredible have this incredible capacity. And we also, because of the way we come into the world and our genetics and how we live, each of us has a different sensory profile. So my hearing might be better than my eyesight. I may not have as strong a sense of smell as maybe touch, but we each have this unique, almost sensory impression that allows us to bring the world in different ways. Next slide. But I think interestingly, most of us think of ourselves as thinking creatures that, most of us think of ourselves as thinking creatures that feel when we're actually feeling creatures that think. And this is a quote from Jill Bolte-Taylor, who's a neuroanatomist. And, as we're beginning to understand more and more about how we feel, we now know that we have over 34,000 different feelings. And so to be able to process those feelings and make sense of those requires extraordinary mechanisms. Next slide. And so, the takeaway here is that we are wired for the arts. And we now know that as we are bringing in these artistic and aesthetic experiences, they're all altering a complex physiological network of interconnected systems. So cardiovascular systems, muscular systems, respiratory systems, immune and endocrine systems. But in many cases, they're happening simultaneously. And I really can't think of anything else that does that with our brains, bodies, and spirits in the same way. Next slide. And so while philosophers and artists and children, I think, have always known the power of the arts, it's only been in the last 25 years that we've been able to get inside our heads to really understand how the arts and aesthetic experiences change us. And so this field called neuroaesthetics is the study of how the arts and aesthetic experiences measurably change our brains, bodies, and behavior, and how this knowledge, and this is really important, how this knowledge can be translated into practices that advance our health, our well-being, our learning, community development, thriving, all these things that make us so human. And so this field of neuroaesthetics, from a scientific perspective, brings together brain science, technology, arts, psychology, social work, public health, many disciplines that create both an interdisciplinary and a transdisciplinary approach to really understanding not only how and why mechanisms work, function, and structure happen, and behavior occurs, but also how we can use this in the world in a very significant way. Next slide. And so I mentioned that the way that we bring this information in through our bodies is through our senses, but our bodies have these enormous capacities to be able to process information, and that's really through this process called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity really underlies everything that we do, our movements, emotions, our memories. When we're bringing information into our brains and bodies, we have over 100 billion neurons that connect at a synaptic level. And this is how we are able to create strong neural pathways that connect different systems and structures within our brains and bodies. And we now know that the arts and aesthetic experiences are some of the most powerful ways that we're really able to create really strong neural connections from the time that we're very little all the way through our lifespan. So the power of neuroplasticity is that it happens throughout our life, and we always have the ability to be able to change our brains and bodies. And I find that to be incredibly hopeful. Next slide. So this is just an image from the book, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it other than to show you that you can see all of these different sensory systems that connect, and sort of at the middle of the brain, which is where the hippocampus is, and the what's called the saliency network, and that can be represented in the blue area and sort of the orange area. What we know is that we could never process all of the information that we bring in, that's around us and that we bring into our bodies. But we have this amazing ability to be able to process what's either important to us for practical reasons or emotional reasons. And that's what's called salient. So, in truth, we only process we're only conscious of about 5% of our mental activity. Everything else really happens on an unconscious level. Next slide. And so the default mode network is this part of our brain that is sometimes called the neurological basis of self. And it's this part of your brain that goes to work when you're not processing information, when you're in that sort of place between the nodes, where you're really sort of allowing what you've brought in to really become better known to you. It's this place where you connect the dots, where you find patterns, where you make sense of the world. it's this place where you decide what you like and you don't like, what's beautiful and not beautiful. And it's also this place where you daydream and mind wander and you think to yourself. And so the default mode network turns out to be a really important place where we all need to go. So it's a real call out for taking the time to be able to just let yourself process information. Next slide. And so just to take that one step further, and I alluded to this a little earlier, neuroscientist Anjan Chatterjee has developed a theoretical model called the aesthetic triad that you're seeing here, which helps to explain why each of us understand information sort of on an individual level. And so there are three components that collectively come together to create your unique experiences. And that's really what you're seeing here. So it's a combination of both where you come from and what you know, how you're sensorially or motorily wired, and then how you value those kinds of experiences. And it's at the center of that that really creates your unique aesthetic experiences. Next slide. So I love this metaphor of the elephant in the room, and it's mostly because the arts are ancient and powerful like elephants. They're also an evolutionary imperative for humanity. They're really fundamental and they're so uniquely important. And depending upon where you touch the elephant, you're going to get something different. And I think that's also really important when you're thinking about what art forms for what purposes at different ages throughout our lives. Next slide. So this is just to say that neuro arts has implications for every sector of society. And we're seeing that now emerge as the research is coming forward. Next slide. I'm not going to read these, but you'll get this deck. And what I wanted to provide to you was some of the significant impact that we're starting to see through the research. So you can see that just working on an art project 45 minutes can reduce stress by 25%, or dancing for just 15 minutes reduces stress, anxiety, depression, and also helps to release different kinds of hormones like endorphins and serotonin. And there's a lot of this kind of information that's really coming forward that I think helps to make the case for why the arts in education, in learning, in and out of school time, and in all the other areas where we're starting to know that the arts are really making a huge difference. Next slide. This is just to say that we now know that researchers are discovering that the arts, like no other kind of learning, transfers in every area of our lives, and that we know more than ever that this idea that creativity and creating art, where many of us were shut down at such a young age from making art, really, in essence, begins to start to create the kind of resistance to building strong neuroplasticity that we were talking about earlier. Next slide. In brain development, we're seeing the music, which is the most studied art form, really have a huge impact on the way that we create these strong neural pathways. But also, we now know that things like singing and humming activate the vagus nerve and engage the parasympathetic nervous system and help us become instantly calm and able to focus. So the more we start to think about how do these different art forms affect different aspects of our lives, the more we're able to begin to start to advance that. Next slide. I just want to say briefly that technology and interactive experiences are starting to merge and dissolve the boundaries between art and viewers, and engaging our senses and creating very strong emotional reactions. And more, we're starting to see how arts and immersive experiences have a really huge ability to be able to help us build some of the skills that we need. And I think we're seeing that a little bit in education, but I think there's a balance and a big conversation to be had there. Next slide. And just lifting up that while I spoke about music earlier, music reduces anxiety, we now know, by up to 44%, pain by 29%. And also this has huge implications on the kinds of pharmacological interventions and what's happening in that space. And so beginning to start to think about other implications for how these art forms are impacting us is also super important. Next slide. A shout out to working with folks with developmental differences. And this is a program in Venezuela where they host these amazing interactive studios with visual art and are starting to see things like problem solving, focus, attention, self-confidence build in huge measure. Next slide. And just one other art form that I wanted to sort of lift up is the idea of expressive writing and also poetry. Social psychologist James Pennebaker has been studying this for over 30 years. And what he's seen is that cognitive load increases and cortisol decreases when we are writing and sharing our stories and expressing what's happening with us. And I think there's something really valuable about this act of writing and telling our stories. And we're seeing that even if you never share your story, to be able to articulate those feelings that have been held inside of you really starts to affect things like PTSD and trauma. Next slide. So in closing, I just wanted to leave you with these 5 takeaways that can be used in many of the domains that you work in. The first is we have the proof that there is an art for that. Anytime, anywhere, anybody, that arts, science, and technology are merging, and they're merging at incredibly rapid paces. And finally, when you change your lens, you change your life. Next slide. So art is our one true global language. It speaks to our need to reveal, heal, and transform. It transcends our ordinary lives and lets us imagine what is possible. The success of our species, I think, comes down to this. Art creates culture, culture creates humanity, and community creates life. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm looking forward to having a larger conversation.
Thank you, Susan. Just a wonderful presentation, and you do fantastic. You do such fantastic work. We have time for one, maybe 2 questions, and I want to just get straight to them. This is a great question. How has the research been received by those who challenge the value of arts? Have opinions been changed? I think that this is to a broader issue of challenges as it pertains to arts funding, maybe at the state and local levels, as well as arts education funding. So could you speak to that?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. So, Jamie alluded to this, that, arts have been taken out of schools in the past. They're still being taken out of schools. They are still in many counties and states and at a federal level maybe seen as something that can go, that it's a nice to have. And I think the science of the arts is really creating a new message. And that's really important, that we're starting to be able to show the neurophysiology, the psychology, the structure and function. And that argument is a really important argument. So I have seen this be a nonpartisan issue, which is incredibly important across these different domains. I've also seen that when you really start to understand what individual policymakers are addressing in their own lives, and you bring this work forward, it is invariable that you'll hit on something that someone can relate to through a lens of the arts. Oftentimes, I'll ask people if they've ever had an art experience that's changed their life in some way, and to a person, it is. So, we're working right now on the messaging, and to make sure that we understand what the value proposition is in different sectors for different policymakers, so that we can align to that. And I'll just use an example. In the 90s and early 2000s, when early childhood was really on the table in a big way, we started to show the value of birth to 5 for brain development. For early childhood education, that's when the narrative really started to change. Now we are beginning, in large part with Americans for the Arts, to start to identify advocates at the state and national level that are interested in being supporters of this work. But we're really working hard to be able to develop both economic cases. So this Alzheimer's work that I mentioned is really important, but also scientific cases. So we're trying to really package this information in a way that can move the ball forward, and not just turn up the dial, but really flip the switch.
Great. Thank you, Susan. I'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your work. It is truly inspirational. and invaluable. We have some questions. We're going to forward those over to you as well, and we will get answers to all of your questions. But thank you, Susan. You're great at what you do. More importantly, you're a wonderful person. Thank you for joining us today.
It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
Great. So we're going to shift now to our panel. We'll be focusing on a panel on arts education advocacy. Joining me are three experts who have been state and local arts advocates, administrators, and artists themselves. It's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Robinson, Executive Director at South Carolina Arts Alliance, Lauren Meehan, Director at Arts Ed Network, or Newark, I'm sorry, and Waduda Muhammad, Executive Director at Georgians for the Arts. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think my first question for all of you is just to give a little bit, to give us a little bit of background on yourself, the work that you do, and why arts education advocacy is important to you. I will start just on my screen here. I see Waduda is to my right, so I'll start with you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Waduda Muhammad, Executive Director of Georgians for the Arts. I have always been a lifelong learner of the arts. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I came to America with my family at the age of 8 and had a really hard time assimilating to American culture, and the arts was the way and the language that I used to be able to navigate just through everything. So I consider myself a lifelong learner of the arts. I've studied everything from dance to instrument to drawing and painting to photography to sculpture, you name it, and went on to college to study arts education. And that was during the time that arts education was being cut in public schools. So I shifted to art history and got involved in arts advocacy at the state level in 2008. So have served at the state arts advocacy level for a little over, I keep saying 10 years. Yeah, just happy to be here.
Well, thank you for all of that great work. Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, hi everybody. Jeff Robinson with the South Carolina Arts Alliance. I spent 7 years as a middle school band director, so if I wasn't doing this, I'd still be out there ringing the bell for arts education. And if you're on this call and you're currently a teacher, thank you for everything you do. I understand, and I've been in your shoes, and you really carry the torch for what this means for students and what this means for teachers.
Thanks, Jeff. And Lauren, I've had the pleasure of seeing your work in action in Newark. How are you? And give us a little bit of background on your about you, about the work that you do, and why arts education is important to you.
Yeah, I am the beneficiary of a high quality free public arts education. I received violin in the 3rd grade, and it really changed my trajectory. I got to travel the world, truthfully, because of that violin. I went on to study art history. I've been a classroom educator. I've run after school and summer programs. So I have a lot of that 360 view of understanding what the benefits and the rewards are of high quality arts education, while also understanding what the barriers and challenges often are. And so a lot of our work here at Arts Ed Newark sometimes lives in advocacy in the traditional ways we think of it, but it also works in the ways of like, how do we support and enrich the sector, as well as coalition building, to really make sure that people have the things they need in order to do this kind of work, whether that's money or training or just somebody to talk to, quite frankly.
Thank you.
We're glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
Great. Jeff, what are some of the things that you are advocating for as it pertains to arts education at the state and local levels?
Yeah, so arts education advocacy has always been a core part of our work here at the South Carolina Arts Alliance. You know, we advocate for organizations, we advocate for artists, we advocate for the creative sector, but none of those things exist without arts education. So that's really where it all begins. And when you talk to administrators and you talk to, you know, community members, you talk to legislators, I think everyone is invested in student success. So our job as an organization is to demonstrate why the arts are a crucial piece of that puzzle. So we'll never stop spreading that message. We're really intentional about involving students and involving teachers. And for example, our annual State House Day, you know, giving opportunities to share those stories. But, you know, there are tons of examples where we have, you know, led state level efforts that are directly related to arts education or been part of those efforts. But I think that there are even more examples of us just advocating for the arts to have a seat at the table when leaders are trying to tackle broader issues. So that might mean building out an advocacy plan that aligns with whatever the current educational trends are in our state or in our nation, for that matter. So, for example, in South Carolina, teacher recruitment, teacher retention continues to be a concern, and state leaders are really well aware of that. So. We can continue to build our message around, you know, tackling that issue together, and we can look at arts-rich schools in our state and say that, hey, these teachers across all the subjects, not just of the arts, they love where they work. They have much higher retention. You know, we can point to the arts being a critical needs area in our state and encourage local leaders to adopt practices that help recruit and retain arts educators. Or another example, our state just released a unified plan for education and workforce development, which is just kind of a cross-sector plan to tackle some of the workforce issues that have been going on in our state. So now we're looking at how the arts can contribute to those shared goals, like helping students develop the soft skills that employers are saying are lacking in the workplace. So it's not always about the money, and I think 90% of the time, advocacy is about educating stakeholders and educating leaders, raising awareness. So when it does come time to ask for a bigger investment, that groundwork is already there. So that's a lot of the work that we do.
That's great. Now I have some follow-ups a little bit later on that. Waduda, we've spoken a lot about your work right now at Georgians for the Arts. In some ways, you're just beginning this process, and we both felt that it'd just be very important to share what you're doing right now, because I think that will be helpful to a lot of others who are, you know, thinking about diving into the arts education advocacy space. So would you mind sharing your journey thus far?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So historically, Georgians for the Arts and the previous organizations before have really kept arts education under the overall umbrella of the advocacy work that we do. It's never really been segmented. And this year, following our Georgia Arts Day event, where we bring advocates from across the state to do advocacy work and training, there seemed to be a heightened sense of awareness around the need to focus on arts education from the federal level to funders, regional organizations. And so we decided to kind of take art education as a focus and see what it is that we're missing and learn what it is that, you know, the needs are, you know, in our state. What we have done so far is look at all of the pre-existing resources that are out there. We certainly don't want to recreate the wheel. So there are organizations that are doing some of this work on the local level. We want to be able to reach out to those organizations and partner with them. One of our key organization kind of partners is Georgia Council for the Arts. They are a state agency that we work alongside with, and they have all of the arts education resources that you need. So they're a great resource. But we've also identified a teaching artist and artist registry that they have, and reached out to form kind of a group of kind of a cohort of specialists around the states we've been meeting with to get a better understanding of what it is that they're looking for us to do for them and what they need from us. And the top two things that, kind of became evident was that in the state of Georgia, there needs to be a convening of just art educators. So where we have our annual convening of all of the mediums, right? They want to be able to connect with other arts educators and teaching artists across the state and share resources and examples and best practices of what's happening in their community. And there isn't anything like that that's happening. The other thing from an advocacy standpoint that we see that we could potentially provide is like a training toolkit. So we can take all of what we know about advocacy and speaking to your elected officials and, connecting with your arts councils and your art commissions and looking at legislation that is either state level legislation or federal level legislation and put that together in just an arts education bucket, that is something that we internally could probably travel the state and do trainings, is something that we're looking at. So still early in our process. It's been positive, and we're really excited about all of the information that we're learning so far in our journey.
Thanks, Waduda. Like I said, I think that that's just helpful for folks to hear, because I think one of the things that obviously is helpful to arts education is expanding that base of arts advocates, and you are providing a template on doing that. Lauren, I wanted to talk a little bit about your work at Arts Ed Newark. You all have some wonderful programs there. Can you explain a couple of those programs and how those programs and activities link to your arts education and advocacy?
Absolutely. So I think the most obvious to talk about, at least to start, is our Arts Ed Ambassadors program. If you go to our website, which is artsednewark.org, I think Olivia dropped it, /ambassadors. You can learn more about it, but it's really a parent and caregiver training program that we started a couple of years ago. We are in a very interesting position here in New Jersey, where arts education is actually constitutionally mandated. It's part of the 7 required subject areas that all students must have access to throughout the entirety of their education here in the state. So a lot of our work is really just informing people and sharing that information with people and helping them understand what that means, and addressing some of the gaps between that mandate as well as administrative code, where it's a little bit more gray and maybe administrators don't recognize the importance of that. And so we spend a lot of time building community. We offer dinner, we have childcare available, parents get stipends to really make sure that all the barriers are eliminated in order for them to participate, and really work hard to elevate, what are your rights in terms of an education in our state, what your children are entitled to, and then talk about how can we create more opportunities for young people to access the arts. And so this year, our parents put together a policy brief, which is not yet on the website, but will be soon, where they really looked at that, like the way in which, there's an unfunded mandate funding in our state in terms of the arts. There's no CUSAC, there's no sort of evaluation to connect that to, right? So how do we advocate for the investment in arts education, especially at this moment in time where everything's really heavily focused on learning loss? How do we elevate some of the things that Susan was talking about earlier? And that sort of brings me to the second piece. So we have that group of parents, they're activated, they're informed, they're organizing, they're building an advocacy plan on their own around that policy brief. But then, those are the people that sign up, they raise their hand, they feel the arts are important and they want to talk about arts education, they want to make sure they're invested in that, right? But then there's folks that maybe don't still recognize it. Maybe they've had a positive experience with the arts, but they're still not valuing it or elevating it in the way we were talking about earlier in Susan's work. And another interesting way that we've been able to advocate is through our healing-centered engagement and the arts work. So we've been doing that work for a bit longer, for about 7 or 8 years now. And we really look at the intersection between what the arts provide, sort of the tools of the teaching artist and the arts educator, to provide more healing-centered spaces for young people. And we started this work, ironically, before the pandemic. Our mayor, Ras Baraka, has declared Newark to be a trauma-informed city and a healing-centered city. So we saw this as our responsibility for our piece of the pie, right? We're not making art therapists. We're not asking people to replace clinicians. But what are our responsibilities? What are our opportunities in the arts to make sure that students have a really positive experience in school and after school programs through the arts, and sort of using that as another way to bring people to the arts and to bring arts into spaces where they haven't been before. And so that's given us a lot of access to parents, to educators, to clinicians, to Sunday school teachers, to tutors, to folks that interact with, we say any adult, any youth-facing adult has participated in that program. And so it's been another way to build, again, a different coalition who's looking at the work perhaps in a different lens if they're not already sort of on the arts education bandwagon. So I think there's lots of ways that in the programs we run, we're building these coalitions, we're sharing information, we're educating the public, and finding new ways to bring arts education to the fold, to the front.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, you all just do such fantastic work there. And like I said, I had the pleasure of seeing you all in action. Jeff, I wanted to come back to you. One question that we often get is it can feel a little complicated as to who they're supposed to advocate to, who are the decision makers that they need to be reaching out to make a difference. Can you provide any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is a piece of the puzzle, you know, identifying who the decision makers are. So for example, if you're advocating for a bigger budget for your band program, right? That's something I've had to do, right? Going to a state leader is probably not going to have that much impact. But if I'm trying to communicate the value of, you know, public investment in the arts, then that's a larger statewide message that I want legislators to hear. So you know, our organization tries to fill in some of the gaps on that. For example, Americans for the Arts has been doing a lot of work at the national level to advocate for increases to the Every Student Succeeds Act, because parts of that funding can be used for arts education. But when we talk to our local arts education leaders, we realize that a lot of district level decision makers didn't necessarily understand how the arts fit into that landscape and into that framework. So then we started to develop resources for teachers and for administrators that kind of broke down how the arts fit into that, so that way they can take those to the local leaders, and that kind of bridges the gap between, you know, that federal advocacy work and then also, you know, what that means for the local level. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And advocacy looks different depending on who you're advocating to, but knowing who those decision makers are is definitely the first step.
Thanks, Jeff. Moving on to you, Waduda, I wanted to ask, you know, we have some folks in the audience who, you know, might be an organization that does not advocate for arts education but wants to. And then we also have just some independent, you know, arts advocates who heard about an Arts and Education Week webinar. What are some of the things that you have done and can recommend for them to do to get plugged into arts education advocacy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, first and foremost, in Georgia, you know, we encourage you to, you know, join our membership. And by joining our membership, you will get, you know, access to, you know, pertinent information and resources as it comes to us. But you mentioned something, Tooshar, that I think is really important, that there are folks that maybe are not arts advocates or they're not an organization. And, you know, I think it's so important, especially as I have been doing this work and continue to do the work, that people understand that you don't have to be with an organization, a group, or an entity to advocate. You do not have to work in the arts to advocate for arts issues, that you can do that just as an individual, and encourage your family members and encourage your neighbors and whomever lives in your community and goes to your church or wherever you find them, to be able to champion the causes that affects their lives, your lives, and whomever, to be the change that you want to see in your community. So um, it's also really as easy as picking up the phone and finding out who your legislators are. They're really easily accessible. They're an email away, they're a phone call away. They really are. And if you don't get them, you get their staffers. Their staffers are probably the best line of entry and access into anything that you need to know about the issues that your legislators support, and to be able to get them, kind of get yourself on their radar, invite them to, events that are happening in your communities, is a great way to really connect with them. And, just know that we're here as a resource. Yeah, is really, it's so simple, yet it's so intimidating to a lot of people, and it really is not an intimidating process. So yeah.
Those sound like words of wisdom, Waduda. I'm gonna end last question, both for Jeff and Lauren. Can you just talk a little bit about the importance of a coalition building in arts education advocacy and your experiences?
For us, I mean, we're place-based, so I know that Jeff and Waduda are working with statewide organizations. We're the city of Newark, so we're very specific and locally sort of situated. We are the largest city in New Jersey, but having our partners at Arts Ed New Jersey, having our partners at the State Department of Education, right, our local Board of Education, our local city council, we are a collective impact initiative. So by just design, it was really important to us that we had all the players at the table, but also that we had parent voice, that we had an educator voice, that we had student voice. And so what comes with that is when a problem does arise, when there's an issue at the district level, at the state level, it's really easy to get people organized, or it's a lot easier to get people organized, right? Because we already know each other, we already have this community, we already have this shared knowledge. And so it sort of allows us to activate in a different way. And so I think building coalitions has really been the thing for us in terms of being heard, but also that alignment, right? So we have partners in the healthcare space, we have partners in the criminal justice space here in the state and the city, and they line up and work with us as well on certain issues where it's not just an arts education issue, it's a child welfare issue, or it's an education issue broadly. And so I think for us, that coalition building has strengthened our ability not only to do our work in arts education, but to get just lots of things done in the local Newark community, because we're talking to each other. We're not all in these silos. And so coalitions can be a really powerful way to organize people and get alignment around any issue.
Oh, great. Thank you, Lauren. How about you, Jeff? Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think arts and collaboration go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other, and we certainly can't do what we do without partnerships. And we know that we're a statewide organization, and the people with the most important stories are the people that are closest to the issues. And in South Carolina, especially, we've got a long history of this idea of collective impact, going back, over 35 years, with the creation of our Arts and Basic Curriculum Institute, which is a partnership between the Department of Education, South Carolina Arts Commission, and Winthrop University. It's this network of arts-rich schools, professional learning for educators, for administrators and leaders, research and resources. And they've really led the way in demonstrating how the arts and creativity can transform lives. So that idea is really something that we tap into. And I think that the more recent result of that is that when all the American Rescue Plan money came down to our Department of Education, they sent the money out to the school districts. The state got to keep a little bit for statewide programs, and through that collective impact model, the Arts Commission was able to secure 20 million over 3 years to tackle COVID learning loss through arts education. And that brought people like the ABC Institute, nonprofits that were already doing the work, organizations that were in after school programs, organizations that were there during the school day, teachers, administrators, and this idea that the work is already being done. What happens if we have an influx of public support for it? And man, I could talk all day about the results of that. And that's work that will continue in South Carolina. But that goes back to what I said before, that you have to lay the groundwork, because one day that opportunity may be there. And we were in a really, a particular set of circumstances where the superintendent of education was a former music teacher, right? And we had large bipartisan support for the arts and arts education, and all of these things just happened at the same time on top of a worldwide pandemic. But we were in position to really elevate the arts as part of that solution. So advocacy is a long journey. It's not always about what you can get this year or what you can get in this moment, but that doesn't mean that the work is not important, because eventually you'll see that result.
Thank you,
Amen.
Jeff. What a wonderful way to end the panel. Thank you, panelists, for your wisdom and service to advocate for arts education. I worked with all of you, and I'm not overstating it when I say you're true game changers in the arts advocacy space. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to turn it over to Olivia Tarpley, our dynamic public policy manager at Americans for the Arts. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Tooshar, and thank you again to our wonderful panelists. You all have really set the stage beautifully for our advocacy tips and principles that we want to share with you all today. A lot of what I'm about to talk about, our panelists actually have just touched on. So this is hopefully going to be great reinforcement for you all to be taking these things out into your communities to celebrate National Arts and Education Week, but also to pair that celebration with advocacy. So what is advocacy and why does it matter? Advocacy is really just about telling your story, educating others, like our panelists just talked about, establishing relationships, and being authentic. You all are all the experts in your respective fields. So if you're not taking the time to educate and inform elected officials, who will? Often, if elected officials aren't hearing from folks, they're going to assume one of two things, either that everything is fine or that no one cares about a particular issue. And this is why advocacy is so important. It's so important for you to raise your voice so that you can see success and you can see things change for the better in your communities. As far as relationships, these relationships with elected officials can range anywhere from keeping in touch with their staffers regularly through email to make sure that you have up-to-date information, or you can even become an advisor or resource for an elected official. It's important that arts education advocates are taking initiative to advocate for what's best for students and teachers and for the whole ecosystem so that lawmakers can understand what laws and policies are going to support students' learning. And remember, it's all about being authentic and sharing what's important to you and then illustrating why others should also care about that issue. Next slide, please. So some of the key principles of advocacy are that it's not a linear process. Again, like our panelists just said, this takes a lot of time. And so start to put advocacy as part of your daily work so that you can see the success down the line. Politics are fluid and change is constant, and those successes don't happen overnight. So just be ready for it. Coalitions help to strengthen your work. So think about the organizations and individuals and other entities that you can work with to advance your goals. And elected officials respond to voters, so include as many people as you can so that you can see your advocacy efforts pay off. It's important to get to know your elected officials and create partnerships with them so that you can be laying the groundwork for the different asks that you might have over time. If you wait until you really need something or something's gone awry, then it's too late. So build those relationships and partnerships early on. As you're thinking about your advocacy, create a clear message. So consider who's delivering the message, how is the message being delivered, and share the message in multiple ways so that you can strategize and make sure that the whole coalition is aligned and that the message is heard. And always make sure that the ask is clear. And then last but not least, remember it's about policy and not personality. So you may not agree with your member of Congress or their staff or other policymakers, and that's okay. When you're advocating, however, just focus on the policies and leave personality out of the conversation. Next slide, please. So now let's talk some about the different resources we have available to you all to make your case as you're advocating. Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund have a lot of things that you all can use this National Arts and Education Week while you're talking to elected officials and other decision makers. So first, you can acquaint yourself with the specific funding issues using our Arts Education Funding Brief. We also have a set of fast facts that you can use to share quick bits of knowledge about how impactful arts education can be for students. The Arts Action Fund creates fact sheets that detail why the arts matter in every state. So you can use this resource to outline many of the ways that the arts are making an impact in your state. As I'm sure everyone here knows, the arts are absolutely fundamental to our humanity, and they inspire us and foster creativity. They also strengthen our communities socially, educationally, and economically. So to this end, we have a set of 10 reasons to support the arts that you all can share with elected officials and decision makers to illustrate the ways that the arts touch every part of our lives. This also includes a webinar resource from our Vice President of Research, Randy Cohen, along with a written resource that you all can share with your networks and elected officials. These 10 reasons really illustrate why an investment in artists, creative workers, and arts organizations is vital to our nation's post-pandemic recovery, and all the way from the economy to the classroom to our communities. We have also just released a new survey called Americans Speak Out About the Arts in 2023. This is the third in a series of national public opinion surveys about arts and culture, with the previous iterations being conducted in 2015 and 2018. The survey was conducted by Ipsos Public Affairs on behalf of Americans for the Arts. And the survey reports that Americans show unequivocal and overwhelming support for arts education at all levels, including both in school, grades pre-K through 12, and out of school in the community. And last but not least, in the coming days, you can check out our social media campaign toolkit, which will provide assets that you can share, that you can use to share the news about National Arts and Education Week, and also encourage your networks to participate in celebrating the week and advocating for arts education. Next slide. So in addition to celebrating National Arts and Education Week, we want you all to take action to let local, state, and federal officials know about the importance of arts education. We've developed these suggested advocacy actions for you to pair with National Arts and Education Week this year. And these action items touch on all levels of government, so from local to state to federal. The first action item is sharing the National Arts and Education Week resolution with your state and local leaders. Second, sign the Voter Voice campaign to reach out to your members of Congress at the federal level to ask them to support federal arts education funding. Third, you all can join the Arts Action Fund to keep up with important news related to the arts and arts education. And then next, check your emails for updates from Americans for the Arts about any other actions we suggest that you take during National Arts and Education Week. Next slide, please. So if you're wondering where to locate information about your elected officials, USA.gov has 2 sites that we recommend that you all can use to figure out who you need to be in touch with. So this first page has state and local governments. And next slide, please. And one more slide. Thank you. And so this is another resource that you all can use to get a curated list of the state and local officials that you would need to be in touch with to share the resolution. Next slide, please. This is our voter voice campaign, which you all can use to reach out to your members of Congress at the federal level to encourage them to support arts education funding. So this gives you a brief background on the arts education funding issues and has the messaging component so you can write to your elected officials and share the news with them. This will go to your senators and to your U.S. House of Representatives member. Next slide, please. And this is where you'll find information on joining the Arts Action Fund. The Arts Action Fund shares timely legislative updates and other important news on arts and arts education issues. And again, we encourage you to be checking your email in the coming weeks as we'll be in touch with you regarding various updates related to National Arts and Education Week. Those updates will come from our email advocacy@artsusa.org. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so with that, thank you all so much for attending today. Like some of our speakers have said, we really appreciate you all so much, and your advocacy and your voice is very important. So we are more than happy to answer any questions that you all have. Again, as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, and you'll be able to find the recording, slides, and the other resources that I've just talked about on our webpage.
Thank you, Olivia. Just wanted to quickly ask, with a couple of minutes that we have remaining, can you just reiterate the fact that you said earlier, this is kind of, this is only the beginning and that we're ramping up for Arts and Education Week. What's the best way again for people to be plugged in?
Yes, absolutely. So like Tooshar said, this webinar has been a ramp up. National Arts and Education Week is September 9th through the 13th. And we will be in touch with you all through our email advocacy@artsusa.org. And we'll be sure to put that in the chat as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Olivia. Again, we will definitely be in touch with you on updates on new assets, new materials. Also, please feel free to use the advocacy at artsusa.org. That is not a dummy account. Olivia or I will be the ones responding to you. We want to hear how we can be a resource for you, how we can help improve your work. And then really how we can learn from you, because you all are the state and local advocacy experts doing this work. We want to hear, we want to learn about the great work that you're doing, because I think that helps inform us as well. Thank you all again for attending. You are wonderful, amazing partners, and look forward to working with you over the course of the next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.